For 45 long and dedicated years, Gould David served God within the familiar and hallowed halls of the Orthodox Christian Church. His life was a tapestry woven with prayer, ritual, and unwavering commitment to his flock. He was a priest, a guide, and a spiritual father to many souls across Australia. His days were measured by the ringing of church bells, the scent of incense, and the solemn words of ancient liturgies. He believed with all his heart that he was walking the path that God had laid out for him, a path of service and devotion that had defined his entire adult existence and brought him a sense of profound purpose. His commitment was not merely a professional duty, it was the very core of his identity. Every sermon he preached, every sacrament he administered, and every hand he held in comfort was an extension of his deep-seated faith. He had dedicated nearly half a century to understanding the mysteries of the divine, to contemplating the nature of God, and to guiding others in their spiritual quests. He was a respected figure, a man whose life was a testament to his beliefs. The community looked to him for wisdom, for solace, and for a connection to the sacred, a role he fulfilled with sincerity and grace for decades. The foundations of his faith were built upon the concept of the Holy Trinity, a cornerstone of his Christian understanding. He taught it, he defended it, and he lived by its principles, finding comfort in its complex beauty. The idea of God as Father, Son, and Holy Spirit was the lens through which he viewed the world and his place within it. This doctrine was not just theology to him, it was the very air he breathed, the spiritual framework that supported his every thought and action. He could not have imagined a reality where this fundamental truth would be questioned, let alone replaced by something entirely new. Yet deep within the quiet corners of his soul, a gentle stirring had begun, a subtle and almost imperceptible quest for a peace that seemed just beyond his grasp. It was not a crisis of faith, but rather a persistent, quiet yearning for a more direct, a more absolute connection with the Creator. He sought a truth that was simple, pure, and undeniable, a peace that could settle every question and calm every storm within his heart. This lifetime of sincere devotion, unbeknownst to him, was not an end in itself, but a long and winding preparation for a journey he never expected to take. The call that summoned Gould David to Perth was one of grief and loss. His brother-in-law had passed away, and a family duty called him across the vast expanse of the Australian continent. He travelled not as a priest with a congregation, but as a man mourning a personal loss, his heart heavy with the sorrow that death inevitably brings. The long flight was a time for quiet reflection, a somber interlude between his life in Tasmania and the funeral that awaited him. He was enveloped in the private world of bereavement, a universal experience that strips away titles and leaves only the raw emotions of the human heart. Upon arriving in the bustling city of Perth, he checked into the hotel that had been booked for him. It was a simple, functional place, chosen for convenience rather than luxury. He was tired from the journey and preoccupied with the sad days that lay ahead. As he settled into his room, he glanced out the window, his mind still on his family and the eulogy he might have to give. The view was unremarkable, just another cityscape of buildings and streets. He had no idea that this ordinary hotel, in this unfamiliar city, was about to become the stage for an extraordinary turning point in his life story. It was a detail he barely registered at first, a simple matter of geography. His hotel was located just a short distance, a mere 150 yards, from the grand Perth mosque. Its domes and minarets stood in quiet dignity against the urban skyline, a symbol of a faith that was not his own. In his state of grief, the building was just part of the local scenery, a landmark he noted with passing curiosity. He had seen mosques before, of course, but this one was different. It was present, it was close, and it seemed to be waiting patiently, its presence a silent fact in the background of his sorrowful mission. The proximity was a complete coincidence, a random twist of fate in the logistics of travel planning. No one had intentionally placed him there. Yet in the grand design of a life, what appears as chance is often the first step of a divinely written plan. This accidental closeness, This simple fact of being just a few steps away from a house of worship he had never intended to visit would prove to be the most significant detail of his entire trip. The journey undertaken for a funeral would unexpectedly become a journey toward a new spiritual birth, starting with this simple, unplanned view from a hotel window. As the days in Perth passed, a strange and persistent feeling began to take hold of Gould David. It was an urge, a gentle but insistent pull that he could not easily explain or dismiss. His gaze kept returning to the mosque down the street. It stood there, serene and inviting, and he felt a growing desire to step inside its walls. This was not mere curiosity. It felt deeper, more like a personal summons, an unspoken invitation that resonated with a part of his soul he was only just beginning to discover. The feeling was illogical for a man of his standing, an Orthodox priest, yet it was undeniable. He wrestled with the feeling for a time, questioning its origin. Was it simply a desire for a quiet place to reflect amidst his grief? Or was it something more? Finally, he could resist the pull no longer. He left the sterile quiet of his hotel room and walked the short distance to the mosque's entrance. He stepped across the threshold with a mixture of trepidation and anticipation, leaving behind the world he knew and entering a space dedicated to a different way of knowing God. The air inside was calm, filled with a profound sense of peace that immediately began to soothe his weary spirit. Inside, the tranquil atmosphere of the mosque enveloped him. He saw men in quiet prayer and contemplation, their movements filled with a grace and humility that struck a chord deep within him. It was in this serene environment that he met one of the mosque's imams. The man greeted him with a warm and welcoming smile, showing no surprise at seeing a Christian priest in their midst. There was no judgment in his eyes, only a simple, open-hearted kindness that put David immediately at ease. They spoke for a while, a gentle exchange between two men of God from different worlds. Before he left, the Imam offered him a gift. It was a copy of the Holy Quran, the sacred book of Islam. Gould David had owned a Quran before, had even read parts of it out of academic interest. But this was different. This book was not an object of study. It was a gift, given from one hand of faith to another. He accepted it with gratitude, feeling the weight of the book in his hands as if it was something far more significant than bound pages. He returned to his hotel room not with a souvenir, but with a key, though he did not yet know which door it was meant to unlock. Back in the solitude of his hotel room, the world outside seemed to fade away. The grief of the funeral, the unfamiliarity of the city, all of it receded into the background. In his hands, he held the Quran, the gift from the Imam. Before he opened its pages, however, he felt compelled to turn to God in the most direct and honest way he knew how. He closed his eyes and offered a prayer, not a formal recited prayer from his Christian tradition, but a raw and heartfelt plea that came from the depths of his being. It was a prayer born of a lifetime of seeking and a moment of profound uncertainty. He prayed with a desperate sincerity, asking for clarity and guidance. "Oh God," he whispered into the quiet of the room, "show me the truth. Show me the absolute truth." He laid his heart bare before his Creator, acknowledging the crossroads at which he stood. On one side was the faith he had known and served for 45 years, the faith of his fathers. On the other was this new path, represented by the book in his lap, a path that was calling to him with a mysterious and powerful voice. He asked God to illuminate the correct way, to remove all doubt, and to lead him to the pure, unvarnished reality of the divine. With his prayer still echoing in the silence, he opened the Quran. As he began to read, something extraordinary happened. The words on the page were not just text. They felt alive, speaking directly to the questions that had long resided in his soul. It was not a purely intellectual exercise. He felt the truth of the message on multiple levels at once. Intuitively, it felt right, as if he were remembering something he had always known. Intellectually, the logic was clear and compelling, resonating with his trained theological mind in a way that was both surprising and deeply satisfying. Emotionally, the words washed over him, bringing a sense of comfort and homecoming that he had not felt before. And spiritually, he felt a direct connection to God, a sense of his presence that was powerful and overwhelming. He realized, with a certainty that shook him to his core, that this was not the word of a man. This was the actual, unadulterated word of God, preserved and presented to him in this moment of need. The room was no longer lonely. It was filled with the profound presence of the one God he had been seeking his entire life. As I continued to read the Quran honestly, the central message of the book became overwhelmingly clear, shining with the brightness of 1,000 suns. It was the message of Tawheed, the absolute and uncompromising oneness of God. Every verse seemed to reinforce this fundamental truth, building a case that was both elegantly simple and profoundly powerful. The Quran spoke of a God who was one, who was eternal and absolute, who was not begotten and did not beget. This concept stood in stark contrast to the doctrine of the Trinity that had been the bedrock of my Christian faith for so many decades. The words resonated with a powerful logic that, well, I found impossible to refute. My mind, trained in years of theological study and debate, could find no flaw in the Quran's presentation of God's unity. I faced a stark and unavoidable realization. I could not ignore the truth that God is not three. God is one. The idea that had once been the center of my universe now seemed like a complex human construct when compared to the pure, direct simplicity of Islam's monotheism. The Quran was not just challenging my beliefs. It was dismantling them and replacing them with a foundation that felt infinitely more solid and true. This intellectual conviction was matched by a deep spiritual awakening. The concept of a single, indivisible God who has no son and no partners felt inherently right. It answered the quiet yearning in my soul for a direct relationship with the Creator, unmediated by other figures. The truth of La ilaha illa Allah, there is no God but God, settled into my heart, not as a new idea but as a forgotten memory now vividly recalled. It was a moment of profound clarity, a spiritual homecoming that brought with it an incredible sense of relief and liberation. The complex theological knots I had wrestled with for years simply untangled and fell away. The journey that had started with a somber duty had led me to this pivotal moment of discovery. The quiet hotel room had become my sanctuary, the place where God had answered my prayer with undeniable clarity. The truth had been unveiled, not through a dramatic vision or a miraculous sign, but through the quiet, compelling power of the words in the Quran. I knew, with a certainty that permeated my entire being, intuitively, intellectually, emotionally, and spiritually, that I had found what I had been searching for. My life, I understood in that moment, would never be the same again. When I returned to my home in Tasmania, the clarity I had found in Perth didn't just linger, it really kind of settled in and became a firm resolve. I knew deep down that I just couldn't keep living a life that contradicted the profound truth I had discovered. My first, and honestly my most difficult task, was a formal one. With a heavy but determined heart, I sat down to write a letter to my bishop in the Orthodox Church. This wasn't just a letter of resignation. It was, in every sense, a final farewell to a life that had defined me for 45 years, a life of service, community, and shared belief. In that letter, I tried my best to explain my journey and my newfound conviction. I didn't write with any anger or bitterness, but just with a simple, honest declaration of the truth that had now captured my heart. I knew my words would probably cause shock, maybe even pain, and I didn't take that lightly. But I also knew I had to be true to God above all else. And to make my position really clear, I included in the letter the most important words I had ever written, the Shahada, the Islamic declaration of faith. I wrote, "There is no God but Allah, and that Muhammad, peace be upon him, is his last messenger," sealing my departure from my old life. After sending the letter, I took the next crucial step. I picked up the phone and called the kind imam I had met in Perth, the man who had gifted me the Quran. Over the phone line, on a quiet Wednesday, I formally declared my faith. I recited the Shahada aloud, with the imam as my witness. In that simple, private moment, I officially crossed the threshold and entered the fold of Islam. The man known as Father Gould David ceased to be, and in his place, a new man, a servant of the one God, was born. That telephone call was a profoundly personal act of submission to God, a private confirmation of the change that had already taken place in my heart. But I knew, of course, that faith is also a communal experience. The final step of my initial conversion still awaited. The Imam in Perth arranged for me to connect with the local Muslim community in Hobart, Tasmania. The private declaration was complete, but now the journey was about to become a public one, shared with my new brothers and sisters in faith. My new life was beginning, one call and one letter at a time. The following Friday, I, now embracing my new identity, made my way to the mosque in Hobart. This was my local community, the people who would become my new spiritual family. I wasn't just an observer or a curious visitor anymore. I was arriving as one of them, ready to stand shoulder to shoulder in prayer. The anticipation and nervousness I felt were mixed with a deep sense of peace and rightness. I was about to make public the private covenant I had made with God in my hotel room and confirmed over the telephone. This was the day I would truly come home. During the Jumu'ah, the congregational Friday prayer, I stood before the community. The Imam introduced me and shared a part of my story. Then in front of all the witnesses gathered, I recited the Shahada once more. My voice, which had been used for years to lead Christian liturgy, now rang out with the clear, powerful words of the Islamic testimony. Ashhadu an la ilaha illa Allah wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah. The declaration echoed in that sacred space, a testament to my profound transformation. I was now publicly and officially a Muslim. The response from the Muslim community in Tasmania was immediate and honestly overwhelming. They welcomed me not as a stranger or a curiosity, but as a brother. There were handshakes, hugs, and so many words of sincere encouragement. I felt an outpouring of love and acceptance that touched me deeply. On December 3rd, 2023, I reached out even further, posting in a Facebook group for new Muslims. I introduced myself as Abdul Rahman, a name I had chosen meaning servant of the most merciful, and I sought the support and friendship of the wider community, which I received in abundance. My transition was also visible in my digital life, a modern reflection of my inner change. My social media profile began to transform. In October, my cover photo changed to an image of a mosque and the Quran. By November, it was updated with a Quranic verse about seeking God's forgiveness. I was no longer just Gould David, the former priest. I was Dave Abdul Rahman Gould, a man whose entire being, both online and off, was now joyfully aligned with his new path. The peace I felt was, well, really palpable, radiating from me as I embraced my new life with gratitude. For many, my conversion might seem like a complete rejection of everything I once held dear. People might assume that in embracing Islam, I had to abandon my love and reverence for Jesus and Mary. But honestly, that just wasn't the case for me at all. I discovered that my conversion wasn't about leaving them behind, but about understanding their true roles and finding them again in a new and much more profound context. This realization, I have to say, was a major comfort to me, bridging the gap between my past and my present in a beautiful and unexpected way. In Islam, I found that Jesus, or Isa, is actually one of the most revered and beloved prophets of God. The Quran speaks of his miraculous birth, his God-given miracles, and his noble character. He wasn't the Son of God as I had been taught, but a mighty messenger of God, sent with the same core message as all the prophets before him, to worship the one true God alone. This new understanding didn't diminish Jesus in my eyes. In fact, it elevated him to a place that felt more logical and consistent with the absolute oneness of the Creator. Similarly, I discovered the esteemed position of Mary, or Maryam, in Islam. The Quran dedicates an entire chapter to her, the only chapter named after a woman. It celebrates her piety, her purity, and her unwavering faith as she miraculously gave birth to Jesus. She is presented as one of the greatest women to have ever lived, a role model for all believers. I no longer saw her as the mother of God, but as the chosen and honored mother of a great prophet, a position of immense dignity and grace that I could embrace wholeheartedly. This newfound perspective allowed me to maintain my love for these blessed figures, while correcting what I now saw as a fundamental theological error. I didn't have to erase 45 years of devotion. Instead, I simply had to reframe it, placing them in correct relationship to Allah. This integration of my past reverence with my present belief was a source of immense peace for me. It showed me that the path to Islam wasn't a path of erasure, but one of completion, where the truths I had always cherished were purified and placed within the perfect, unblemished framework of Tawheed. The journey of Gould David, now Abdul Rahman, is, I think, a profound testament to the power of a sincere search for truth. It's the story of a man who was willing to question the very foundations of his existence, even after nearly 5 decades of dedicated service in one faith. My transformation wasn't born of anger, disillusionment, or crisis, but from a quiet, persistent yearning for a deeper peace and a more direct connection with God. This spiritual quest led me from a familiar church in Tasmania to a fateful hotel room in Perth, and ultimately into the heart of Islam. My conversion was a holistic one, engaging every part of my being. It was intellectual, as I found compelling and irrefutable logic in the Quran's message of God's absolute oneness. It was emotional, as I felt a sense of homecoming and comfort in the words I read. And above all, it was spiritual, as I experienced a direct and powerful connection to Allah that settled all my doubts. This complete alignment of mind, heart, and soul is what gave me the courage to change my entire life, leaving behind prestige and familiarity for the sake of truth. The peace that I found was not just a fleeting feeling, but a deep and abiding state of being. My new Facebook intro really says it all. A lifetime seeking the peace of God and Quran has shown me that peace and truth rest in Allah. I found that true peace, the salam that is at the root of the word Islam, comes from submitting one's will to the will of the Creator. In this submission, I didn't lose myself. Rather, I found the most authentic version of myself, the servant of the Most Merciful. The support and love from my new community really solidified this peace, making me feel welcomed and cherished. In the end, my story is, I hope, a powerful message of hope for all who are on a spiritual journey. It shows that it's never too late to seek the truth, and that God's guidance can come in the most unexpected of ways, through a somber trip, a hotel near a mosque, the gift of a book. My life is a beautiful illustration of the Quranic promise that whoever seeks God with a sincere heart will surely be guided. After 45 years of searching, a respected Christian priest found his final spiritual home and the ultimate peace his soul had always craved, not in a new God, but in the one true God he had been seeking all along.